One thing I've noticed in the last decade is, unfortunately, how many entrepreneurs have just fallen off the map. One minute they're just excited about their business idea, and a couple of years later, they're just out the game. Some went back to jobs, and some just decided the stress is not worth it. But then you've got the others that are still in the game, they're still building and still figuring it out. And I'm not saying one road is better than the other, but the thing I find interesting is that a lot of the time, the ones that are still in the game didn't necessarily start with any particular advantage. They weren't like necessarily smarter or more talented at what they were doing. So I started to think about what keeps someone in the game for 10 to 15 years while someone else walks away after, say, 2 or 3 years. The easy answer would be thinking that it's just persistence. Don't quit, keep going, outwork everybody else. But the more I think about it and reflect on my own journey in like the last 10 to 13 years, the more I realize that that's not actually what persistence looks like. Because the entrepreneurs that I've seen last in the game are actually the ones that change everything along the way. They quit businesses, they change direction, they rethink strategies, they shrink their lives, and they become beginners again. So it's not about persisting in that traditional sense. They let go of ideas that they were once convinced would, work out. So they don't persist in that direction. And I think when it comes to the people that refuse to leave the game, I think there are 5 things that make that possible. So I started thinking about my own journey. I've been involved in various different businesses, various different opportunities. Some of them worked and some of them just completely flopped. There were times where I just stopped completely believing in a business and reached a point where I just couldn't see sense in continuing it, which some would say is a lack of persistence. But the thing is, losing belief in a particular business didn't mean I stopped believing that I could build something that would work. I trusted myself to work out what came next. So I think when your self-belief is tied to one particular venture, the failure of it can start to make you feel like you're just not cut out for this entire thing, which is when I feel a lot of people quit, right? But when your belief is rooted in your resourcefulness, you can walk away from the wrong business without it completely taking you out of the game. I've noticed that entrepreneurs that are around for a long time are very comfortable with walking away from things. We can tend to think that entrepreneurs that win are the ones that just stick at something, right? And never quit. They choose something, they commit to it, and they refuse to move on until it works. But that's not what happened for me at all. I think I managed to remain in the game for longer than 10 years, partly because I didn't allow myself to remain trapped in everything I started just because I started it. There were businesses I needed to close, like plans I needed to scrap. I stopped believing that there was just one path. And instead I thought to myself, something will work, even if it's not that particular thing at the time. It makes me think about Slack. I think originally the founders were building some type of game, and eventually they shut down that game because it didn't work out for whatever reason. Whilst building the game, they built an internal communication tool, which they were using within the team. And that is what became the foundation of Slack, which is a massive company now, right? They stopped the original business idea, so they didn't persist with that, but they didn't throw away everything they learned and built along the way. So in other words, quitting one thing doesn't mean you have to quit your larger ambition. But then what happens is, like, let's be realistic, like when you quit a particular business or you move away from it, it can potentially create another problem. You now need enough time and financial room to work out what comes next. You still need to eat, you still need to live somewhere, right? You still need to cover your necessities, your day-to-day necessities. And I know when people first go into starting their own businesses, in their mind, they can think that it's all about expanding your lifestyle, making more money, doing more things, buying more things. But if it's one thing that I've learned, and definitely one of the important things that's allowed me to stay in this game for more than 10 years, is that it's not necessarily always about this expansion. There are times when you need to shrink and make your life smaller in order to, ride out a certain period so you can get to the next goalpost. And I know it goes against like everything, like it's not very inspiring, but I think it's one of the most underrated business skills that there is. Because if you think about it, like every pound that your lifestyle demands is another pound that your business needs to make. And if you've, stopped a business or things have slowed down, having this financial pressure from this expanded lifestyle ends up, creating this atmosphere where you start making decisions that are not for the benefit of you long term. You might, take these opportunities that are really not going to work for you, or you start working with people that just aren't a great fit. And you're making these urgent decisions because your life has just become too expensive. And I have been there. And when I was there, I vowed to myself that I was never going to let that happen again, right? Because looking back, I'm like, wow, you really should have just shrunk your life. And you probably would have been in a much easier position at that time and able to make better decisions. When the game requires it, if you reduce your lifestyle, in effect, you're buying yourself time. But I know one of the reasons why people don't want to do it is because when you shrink your life, when you reduce your lifestyle, it's very, very visible from the outside. You can feel like you just don't look that successful and you don't want people to judge you. But, I think as harsh as this is going to sound, I think you just need to get over it because you've got two choices. One of them is stay where you are, appear to be at the top of your game, at the peak of the mountain right now, when you're not, and risk losing everything, as dramatic as that sounds, or shrink your life, buy yourself time, and start building yourself back up again in a way that isn't stressing you the hell out. And I know it can be difficult at times because, there are some things that you can't get rid of straight away. Like if you're in a long-term lease with where you're staying and your rent is just high, or, you might have other commitments. Maybe your kids are going to particular clubs, or you've already committed to certain holidays and things like this. But this is why I think successful people always say, do not increase your lifestyle at the same pace as your finances are increasing, because where there's this cyclical nature sometimes of income, when you're out there doing it for yourself, you lock yourself into certain commitments. And then now when you're going through this cycle, your commitments and your outgoings are still fixed here. And there are some things you can't get out of. But you didn't anticipate this cycle to happen, right? So when you're much slower to increase your lifestyle demands and you're letting that gap of your income increasing, widen, you've got space in case things go wrong or in case a business shuts down, right? So I think there needs to be a hesitation when it comes to bolting on the next thing into your life and bolting on the next thing. So I think you just have to take the hit and buy yourself that time and reduce the lifestyle. But buying yourself more time is one thing, because you're buying yourself more time until you figure the next thing out. And eventually, if you decide to stay in the game, you're going to want to build something again. And what that usually means is becoming a beginner again. And a lot of people hate being in that position, especially when you've had some success in a different area and you know what it feels like to know a lot of stuff, right? To be good at something to a certain level. But if you have to start again, you're probably not going to know what you're doing in that area if it's new. And what I've noticed about entrepreneurs that stay in the game for a long period of time, they don't care about having to be a beginner again. They don't care about being the least smartest in a room. Lasting a long time requires you to feel okay with being temporarily underqualified. I know definitely for me, some of the, businesses that kept me in the game weren't necessarily the ones that I thought I was going to go in the direction of. So I didn't really have any knowledge over there. And I could have said no to them because I didn't have the experience and then missed out on how great those things would have become. So some of the things that might keep you in the game just require you to be the apprentice again. And none of these new opportunities are going to be particularly valuable to you if you keep showing up as the same person, repeating the same habits, making the same decisions, and walking straight into the same problems over and over again. And I think one of the biggest differences I see between entrepreneurs that stay in the game for longer and the ones that leave is that when something goes wrong, they don't just keep showing up as their same, version of themselves. They try to understand it and learn from it. When people hear that somebody's been in business for 10, 15, 20 years, they just assume that that person had more persistence and determination than everybody else. But it's definitely more granular than that. When I look back at the past 13 years for me, I definitely didn't last because I held on to everything persistently. I believed in myself beyond a single business, and I walked away from things that no longer worked. I shrank my life when staying in the game meant that I needed to do it at the time. And I definitely allowed myself to become inexperienced again. And I took what went wrong and learned from it. So I feel lasting this game of entrepreneurship requires that particular combination. You need enough belief to keep going, but enough honesty with yourself to know when to change direction. So I think it's about remaining committed to building a life through entrepreneurship, but without being persistently attached to a particular version of it, to a point where when that fails, it takes you down with it.